Let me now briefly turn to the outlook for the next year or two. Let me start that when you have a crisis like we are having right now, with unprecedented conditions, unprecedented causes, and unprecedented policy response, I think the most important thing that you can say about the outlook is that nobody knows. And that and the complexities surrounding the other sets of risks I mentioned, and whatever judgments you may reach, and I think it is very important to try to reach a judgment, I think that you have to attach a much higher level of uncertainty to that judgment than you would to these matters, and they're always uncertain, to these matters under more normal circumstances. Let me now go on with respect to the outlook, and I'm going to limit my comments on the outlook to the crisis, not the other three sets of challenges that I mentioned. Though you have to go back to those other three sets of challenges to complete the picture. When you look at the competing considerations around the current crisis, it seems to me the negatives are all sort of outgrowths of the causes I described before. I'm not going to go back to that again. We have the problems of financial institutions. We have an enormous negative wealth effect. We have deleveraging by consumers and by financial institutions. We have the globality. And we have so much else that grows out of the causes that I mentioned before. There are also a set of positive factors, and they've received very little attention, and that's understandable because of the enormous hardship that so many people are experiencing. But we've had a massive policy response in this country, as I've just mentioned. We've had constructive and large policy response in quite a number of other countries. As I mentioned before, China, UK, Korea, being three very good examples. We have the underlying dynamism and the flexible labor and capital markets in the United States. We have, and I think this is a very important point, the already substantial declines in housing starts and in auto prices in the United States, which presumably brings us much closer to the point at which the decline stops, and even if it stabilizes at a relatively low level, you no longer have a decline, further reducing GDP, and the stabilization itself could be a confidence-generating factor. You have vast amounts of cash around the global system, and I think most analysts feel that very large numbers of assets are selling at prices that are attractive, particularly in the credit markets, that are attractive relative to long-term expectations. If you look at the prevailing views, I would say that the prevailing probabilistic view amongst most economists and money managers is that the first quarter in the United States would be terrible, and that's now taken place, it has been terrible. That the second quarter will be weak, that you'll continue to have decline through most or the rest of this year, but at a decline, but at a decreasing rate, and that somewhere toward the end of this year or the beginning of next year, you'll begin to have, the decline will end, and you'll begin to have recovery, but that for all the reasons I've mentioned before, that recovery is likely to be rather slow and bumpy rather than the V-shape we would all like to have, but is, in the view of most, highly improbable. Let me conclude with two thoughts. First, in focusing on the United States, I've organized my thoughts around challenges and risks, and because I think understanding those is key to the decisions we all face. But I think it's also very important to remember the United States has enormous long-term strengths. I alluded to them before. The dynamism of our society, our culture, and our economy, our flexible labor and capital markets, the sheer size of our national economy, and much else. And we have a history of great resilience in rising to meet challenges, although as Winston Churchill once said, sometimes that resilience is a little bit late in coming. But nevertheless, we do have a history of great resilience in rising to meet our challenges. And it seems to me all of this should augur well for the longer run in this country. And that should be an integral part of one's decision-making as one makes decisions now, either as business people or as investors. And my second comment is looking more broadly that many parts of the developing world have really had remarkable histories of policy reform and growth over the last decade, and in some cases over the last 2 or 3 decades, or even longer. And it seems to me that too augurs well for the longer run and should be an important part of one's business and investment decisions now. Having said all that, in order to, and this is my final comment, in order to realize that potential in the United States In order to realize that potential in the developing nations, there is an enormous amount to do. And I think one of the responsibilities that each of us has is to contribute to restoring economic well-being in our respective countries by providing political support for sound and energetic action on the complicated, challenging, and critical issues that we face. Thank you very much. Oops.